I like the script. I like the structure of the script. I like the idea of approaching a story about the supernatural from a scientific point of view. I like the idea of the character of Coupland, of someone who had. You had very contradictory feelings about the character as you read the story, and that you weren't sure whether he was he a charlatan, was he just using this girl for his own purposes? Did he have really a serious intent in finding a cure for her at all? Or was it just some experiment that he was going to keep extending indefinitely, and he was going to sort of play with her like a kind of a lab rat? And there was much more of that kind of element in the script, which is that it really put you in the position of you weren't sure how you felt about these people from going along with the experiment, because there's a point in the script where he says to Sam's character, I'm sure this seems sadistic to you, but it is part of a sort of greater plan, a greater purpose, and we will cure her in the end. But there was that question in people's mind was you were watching what he was doing, it was sadistic, and it did seem as though you weren't sure whether that was all he was trying to do, or was he really trying to get an effect. And there was a sort of period of the story in the first part where you confuse the audience in that way on purpose.
What is it that drives his passion in the field of research? What's driving him?
Well, he has modest ambitions. He just wants to disprove the existence of God, basically. If he can disprove that the supernatural is inspired by any divine agency, and that the supernatural is inspired purely from human agency, then he can start to dismantle the whole concept of there being a God in the first place, which is that whole idea would say there's conflicts between science and religion, and that the scientific method constantly comes up against religious dogma and religious thought, if you like, and that there's a sort of there's a frustration within the scientific world that their rational approach can be undermined at a moment's notice by a religious practice and superstition. So but his goal basically is to disprove the existence of God, and I suppose he's in that sense a classic megalomaniac or egotist. He's playing God himself, yeah.
And how much information about the real case was available to you, and how helpful was that?
I read the book. It's called Finding Philip. It was interesting. It wasn't massively useful because nothing went horribly wrong. They're all alive. No one got killed, and the building didn't burn down or anything like that. Partly that's because they decided to have a benign experience, and whenever the experience would start to turn sinister, the W.A. Owens, who was in charge of it, would end the sessions and send everybody home. But it is certainly the kernel of where this story comes from, that there was a real experiment which was actually successful, where they tried to reproduce paranormal events from purely from a human agency, and it was successful. You can see this experiment on YouTube. They did it in a television studio in Toronto.
And moving on to the terror in some of the scenes, the seance scene with the loud banging absolutely terrified me to my core. Was there a scene or a moment that was particularly unnerving to film, or were there any unusual happenings on set?
That was actually a good scene to film because it was a very long scene, and we rehearsed it like a play. All of those seance scenes that we rehearsed like small plays, we had about a week's of rehearsal before we started shooting. And the style that John wanted to take, which is dictated by the found footage element, which was that there was a 16mm camera filming the whole thing. That meant that you couldn't cut and you couldn't change angles, so it really had to be one long continuous take. So some of these were about 7 or 8 minutes long, and because with the constraints of the budget and stuff like that, you really didn't have you couldn't do it many times. So we practiced it beforehand, and John was it was one of the things that we all had a really good laugh about, was that John would be off camera and he would be giving the bangs of the footsteps coming down and these loud noises and screams and shouts that we were supposed to be reacting to, and it was fun, and it was also pretty goofy. Making films like this is actually goofy more than it is just terrifying, I mean, that scene where we all got the sigils burnt on us, it was really good fun to do because you could overact your heart out, and there was no over the top that you could get to. I mean, anything goes, which is fantastic fun and stuff like this. So, but there was no chandeliers didn't suddenly crash to the table or stuff like that. Stuff that went wrong was more to do with stuff not being there that should have been there and things like that.
I'm glad to hear it. Now, I really enjoyed seeing the sights of Oxford on film. How much did you relish filming in such iconic setting, and what do you feel it adds to the mood of the film?
I guess it adds a sort of certain era or an aura of authenticity in terms of it being a scientific experiment and an area of study. If it took place at Oxford, and it gives it a certain, like I said, authenticity. The shooting in the university itself is fantastic because you get access to stuff that it would never let you see.
And were you a Hammer fan before you took the role?
Actually, now that I was a Hammer fan, I can say that honestly. I used to watch old Hammer movies at my father's house, Tower House. He has this place. It was this old sort of gothic house. And it was before video and stuff like that. And we had a 16mm projector. And you'd go and rent movies. And we loved all those old horror movies, the Mummy movies and the Dracula films and the Jack the Ripper movies and stuff like that. And we used to watch them in the living room with the fire going. So, yeah, great. Loved it.
And what was your favourite?
The one that sticks in my mind is there was some weird story of, it was Jekyll and Hyde. I know this is going to sound weird now, as I realise that I say this. But it was Jekyll and Hyde, but when he turned into Hyde, he turned into a woman and went around murdering people. I don't know what that says about me.
Jared Harris, thank you very much.